me romance. Read me romance. Read me romance. Read me romance. You could take a look in a book, that's fine. Or you could sit back, relax, and unwind and read me romance. Read me romance.
Welcome back, lady listeners.
Hey, lady listeners, welcome back. It is a brand new week at Read Me Romance, and we have Jasmine Silvera with a book called Tasting Freedom. And I'm really excited. She's been so sweet, like over email. So I say that about everybody, I feel like, but I really mean it. Like most people are so nice. And I think it's because like we're not really asking them to do a lot. You know, they just have to write a book and send it to us and give us all their information and make sure they're doing that. No, I'm just teasing.
Get their
but like,
covers together.
yeah. I feel like a pest sometimes because I'm constantly emailing them. But no, she was so kind when she was emailing back and she was saying how excited she was. So it was really great. So I love it when stuff like this happens because I'm like, oh yeah, we're actually like somebody's excited to be on the podcast, you know? I mean, I hope that nobody's ever like upset about it.
Dreading it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I would probably be like, if I was, you know, a new author, this was like my first audio or something, I'd probably be so sick to my stomach. I'd feel like I can't do this. I can't go through with it. It's not going to happen now. So I give up. I quit. So, well, I'm excited for Jasmine because I think this is her first audiobook. I'm pretty sure it is. Like if you go on her Audible page, she doesn't have any more audiobooks available. So she's got a lot of ebooks. So this is really exciting that we're actually doing one for her. Yeah.
It's always interesting to hear it in audio for the first time. You're like, oh my God.
Oh, do you remember the first time you heard your own audiobook?
I think so. I don't know. I've listened to most of them, if not all of them.
Yeah. I haven't listened to hardly any of them, maybe like one or two. I think I have, and I just cringed so bad. Like from the start, I was like, "Oh, I can't do it," and I just got out of it. I don't think I've listened to the whole thing.
I think I would cringe if it was in my own voice.
Yeah. Oh God, that's even worse.
That would make me cringe. I wouldn't listen to that.
I have to go back. Well, I don't have to. I choose to go back and listen to the podcast for quality control, just to make sure, like, all the chapters are there. You know, we're coming in okay. Everything sounds right. It didn't cut out. Because mistakes happen. And so it's all I can do to go back and listen to this part. So I can't imagine if I had to narrate a book and was like, he put his dick inside her.
Oh
like God. I would just absolutely die if my southern twang like came across like I can't imagine.
God.
Well, we were supposed to record last week, but we ended up having like some stuff come up, so we waited. But I wanted to talk about my trip to the Rip Bodice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it was really cool. I went with my friend Abby Knox. I know I mentioned it before that I saw that the Rip Bodice opened a store in Brooklyn. They have one in LA. I've never been to. It was the first brick and mortar all romance bookstore. It is woman and I believe queer and Jewish owned, the sisters that own it. So they were the first one in 2016 that opened in LA. There's since been a couple that have over the country, but they decided to open a branch in Brooklyn, and it's really cool because the big publishers are in New York. So this is in New York. So they're doing a lot of book signings, and what they did, which I thought was really, really clever, was they sold tickets and they had a cap on them. I think it must have been like $150, but tickets were only $15 and it was a $15 store credit. So basically you reserved your spot and then you had enough money to buy a book by buying your ticket, which was really cool. So I went and bought a bunch of stuff. It was great. But, Abby Knox, the day they posted this up, I was like, oh, this is going to sell out immediately because Mariana Zapata never does book signings. Like it's been a while.
Hardly.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been like 4 years or something. I think she had done one. So we went up. I didn't know the other two authors that were there, but Abby Knox and I got a hotel and we were like, let's just make the most of it. We're here for 24 hours. Let's do it. So we went up and we explored some of Brooklyn and ate some really good food. But the main focus was the Rip Bodice, and it was really, really beautiful. The store itself, it was such a cool feeling to walk into that store and know like 99% of the books in there, you know,
To
to just be
recognize
like,
so many names.
yeah, to be like, there's there's a whole wall of Ruby Dixon, you know, like that kind
Mhm.
of stuff. Well, that was amazing to me. Well, that was just so fun. And like they had a whole shelf that was dedicated to like signed paperbacks where the authors had come in and signed their books, you know, and they were all on the
Aw.
shelf. So that was really cool too. And you know, it was they had erotica, they had the LGBTQ plus, you know, they had historicals, like every kind of like breakdown you could think of. It was just so awesome. And it was such like it was sex positive, it was woman positive, it was like it was such a good feeling. So I was like standing in line with Abby. We were outside the store and they had everybody line up beforehand. And there's a couple plus and minuses. So if you're listening and you ever decide to go to the Rit Broadus to do a book signing, here's a couple of things I would say. I don't know if they're going to change the process on how they do this, but what they did was they had everybody line up outside and then they gave you your ticket. You went up and you told them your name. They gave you a ticket and they wrote a number on the back of the ticket and they numbered them 1 through whatever. And that was the order you got in for the signing.
Okay.
So so you got your ticket and then you went in the store and you could shop and everything until it was time. So we lined up at like 4:00, but the signing wasn't until 5:30 or 5. It was like from 5 to 8. So we get in and I'm like 25. So we're not too far back. And I knew some of the people in line. So that was really cool too. And everybody was talking and saying, hey, and they were like, oh my God, I know you. I was like, I know you too. So anyway, so we go in, but the problem is that they didn't close it to the public yet. They closed it for the signing, but before that, the regular patrons were in there. So it was very busy and it was wall to wall people. You could hardly move and
Oh
the air
gosh.
conditioning did not work very well. And they were like, we're sorry, it just can't keep up because it was
Yeah.
like 90 degrees outside and there's 200 people in this tiny bookstore.
Yeah. All the
So
bodies.
yeah. And so we go in and they're not set up yet. And they have to set up the chairs with like 200 people in this place. And so everybody's kind of crushing back so they can set up the chairs. But they only have enough chairs for like half the people at the signing. So like 50 people get to sit down and everybody else has to stand up in the bag. And they have a microphone with a small speaker, but you can't really hear. And we were in the back of the room because we were like, I don't want to crowd in there and try to get a seat, even though we're 24 and 25.
Yeah.
So I was like, let's just stand at the back. But it was so hot and you could hardly hear. And they did a Q&A with the authors. And I didn't catch all of it because it was hard to hear. So that part was less than stellar. So I would just say if for future reference, I don't know what they're going to do, but bring your own personal fan if you can, if you have to go inside and wait. If you get there early, make sure you get a seat. If not, just wait because you're not going to hear anything anyways. So just hang out the back, shop if you want. Which is what I did. They have a wall of stickers that are amazing, like all kinds of like punny and cool bookish stickers, but bookish merch. But after the Q&A was over, they lined us up and they were really good about everybody was like, what's your number? Oh, you're in front of me. Okay, what's your number? Like everybody was awesome about that part.
Yeah.
So we got in line and I got to go up and I got to see Mariana Zapata and I got her to sign my books and she was so sweet. And I went up and I was like, and I had my thing on there. I was like, just make them out to Leah. And I told her, I was like, hey, I said, I know I message you a lot. I'm Leah. I read as Alexa Riley. And she was like, oh my God. She was like, do you know how many times I read Thick? And she was like, it is one of my favorite dirty reads. And I was like, are you serious? I was like, can I cry now? Like, are you serious? And she was like, yes. And like, it was so sweet. And then she leans in and I shit you not, she covers up her face. So like the audience, like the people waiting in line can't see. And she's like, I read Feral Wolf. And she was like, it was so hot. What? And like we had just released these and I was like, are you serious right now?
I'm dying. I read Feral.
Like, and Abby, like afterwards, like, I got my picture made with her and the lady that took the picture. It was so blurry. You couldn't even see who I was, who she was. And it was so funny that I was like, this is incredible because you couldn't even see either of us in the picture. But afterwards, Abby was like, what was she saying to you? And I told her what she said. She's like, you're going to float on that for like a month, aren't you? And I was like, abso-fucking-lutely. Are you kidding me? I was like, that's the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life.
A lot of people are talking about Feral Wolf.
I know. It was a good one. I know. I think I've got like some Halloween themed ones next I'm going to do. I thought that would be fun.
Yeah, but
Some
I've seen a
Halloween
lot of people bring up Feral Wolf, I've noticed.
Mhm. It's a good one. Yeah. But if you read the A.R. Taboo book, Feral Wolf, and you liked it, you need to read Jenica Snow's The Beast because it's very similar. Only hers is much longer and better.
Yeah, hers
So-
those are really long.
Yeah, but hers are good. Like hers are really fleshed out. So it's a true story. I mean, it's definitely like sex forward, spicy story. But yeah, hers are like you can get a whole book out of her. So go read that one. So but yeah, I mean, overall, it was a great experience. I loved it. It was a moment, to get to see her and, say hey and stuff. And I asked her about her narrations. I said, what is it called when you do your narrations? I said, because I want to know what to ask for in the event we ever need to get a book narrated, like professionally. And I said, what is it called when, you do yours, where it's like the heroine's reading the entire book, but when it's the hero's turn to speak, there's a male narrator that speaks.
Yeah.
And she was like, you call that duet narration. She was like, you have to ask for a duet narration. And she said, it's like 5 times more expensive.
And I couldn't
And I was
her
like-
books are so long.
Her books are like 800 pages. Can you imagine? It's probably $10,000 to get her freaking audio done. Like it's probably so much money. I cannot imagine.
Yeah, I would guess like $10,000.
That's what I mean. That's not even an exaggeration. That would be a conservative estimate on what it would cost to get her books narrated. Not only because they're so long, because you're getting 2 narrators in it.
And not 2 narrators reading different chapters.
Yeah, because it's like you can't just take a chapter and sandwich them together. It's like you have to go through with a scalpel and like it's surgery to like surgically take out a word and add a word and do it. I mean, it's got to take so long. But I mean, she released that, superhero book, Gracie and the Grump, last year or something. She still doesn't have the audio done. She's like, they've been working on it for like a year. And I was like, damn. Like that would just that would drive me crazy. But anyways, I just thought that was fascinating too. I mean, as much as I love audios, I find all of that fascinating. So, but yeah, the Red Bodice, the experience was great. I don't know. I was trying to think about it when I was on my way home. I was like, who would I go back and see? Like, who would I go there for? And I was like, okay, Lauren Donner, 100%, like her. And then I was like, I don't know who else that I haven't seen in a long time that I would really want to sign book by. Can you think of anybody? Like it would have to be somebody old school, like somebody who doesn't sign anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Or like 3 people I kind of know or something.
Yeah. You know what? If oh wait, I don't know.
Like Aurora Rose and Ruby Dixon and someone else.
Oh yeah, like I get what you mean.
do
Like
that.
3 authors that you really love. Yeah, because I didn't know the other 2 on it. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it would take somebody like that to get me to to have like 3 people that I really recognize, or somebody like Stacey Abrams that I absolutely idolize. Like I think she's an incredible person, and she also happens to write romance. Like I would go see her, but she would probably be like, there's no way she would do the Rip Bodice. It's not big enough. She would have like thousands of people like beating down the door. But anyways, so. Somebody was there that was an Alexa Riley reader, and she was so sweet. She came up to me when I was in line. She was like one of the first people to go through. And so I was sitting there and she was like, I saw you and I thought that you might be Leah. And then I heard you speak and I was like, oh my God, that's her. I was like, and what? I was like, how you doing? But she listens to the podcast. That's why she said, she was like, I can tell you a male apart easily. I was like, yeah, But she was like, "Will you sign my bag?" And it was a Rip Bodice bag. She had just bought it, and she had a permit.
Aw.
I was like, "No, I'm not gonna." I was like, "This is your brand new bag. I'm not gonna sign this." And she was like, "I don't have anything else to sign." And I said, "What's your address? I'll send you some books." So I got her address, and she was so cute. And I sent her like 10 books or something. I don't know. I sent her
Aw.
like a big box of them, and I was like, "I'm so glad I got to meet you." And she messaged me. She was so sweet.
I love
But yeah.
that.
Mhm. So that was nice. But I should have asked you beforehand just so you were prepared, but I'm going to say, have you been reading anything lately since our last recording? Have you read anything you want to share?
I read, you sent me the Melanie Moreland.
Oh,
I read
yes.
that.
Oh my God, tell me, how was it?
I read it, but I had to go back because I had read it like a month or two ago.
Oh, was it the My Favorite Kidnapper one?
Yeah, she sent it
Okay.
to me a while back, and then
Okay.
it popped back up. But the cover is so adorable.
It's so freaking cute.
It's just a sweet book. Like the
Mhm.
first scene he walks in, she doesn't know who he is, and she's like does wedding cakes, like beautiful wedding cakes, but she's
Oh.
struggling and she wants to open up her own shop and stuff.
Mhm.
And the person she's working with is kind of a dick. And when he comes in, he like touches it or like takes something off of it, and she like smacks his hand, but he like owns everything.
Are you serious?
Like he paid for the wedding, and so it's like his goddaughter's wedding and stuff like that. And so he keeps doing it to fuck with her. Then
I just
later.
looked, it's live now. So
Oh, he
it's
took some of the
yeah.
cupcakes.
Oh, okay. But I just looked, it's the Melanie Moreland, My Favorite Kidnapper. It's live now. If you're listening to this now, it just came out like Thursday before this. So, but yeah, it's in audio and everything. I'm so excited to listen. I've got it saved. So I can't wait
And
to hear
she's
it.
just, it's funny. He's obsessed with her, but he's kind of a grump, and he like pretty much like kidnaps her away.
It's called My
And-
Favorite Kidnapper. I think that's the best title ever.
And they make a deal where
Mhm.
she's gonna make him a cake every day for like
Mhm.
60 days, and at the end he's gonna give her a bunch of money so she can open up. But then Moreland, if you've read her before, there's always some suspense in the background.
Yeah. There's always a
Some
little bit of
stuff comes
suspense to it.
up and
Yeah.
that kind of
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah, I love her. Like I love her writing. She's so she's I don't know. I've said it before, but I think she's like she's safe. Like when I read her books, I know they're going to be good. I know I'm going to get what I want. Like I love her story. She has great audios. So
She does great epilogues too. She's one of the best
Yeah.
epilogue people
Mhm.
out there.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
She's good. So I had one that I read recently, and it's not necessarily an older book, but it was out a while back. But it's called Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. It's a YA book. So there's no sex or anything like that. But so I'm doing the 23 for 23, where you read the 23 BIPOC authors, or BIPOC authors who write BIPOC characters before the end of the year. So that's when I'm trying to hit my goal of 23. But so this one, I just love Talia Hibbert. She wrote one of my favorite books a couple years ago, Get a Life, Chloe Brown. That whole trilogy is so good. If you have not read it, the audio is fantastic. The narrator is so good in it. The narrator is actually the like godmother of the Duke on Bridgerton. I forget what her name is, but she's fantastic. But anyways, so this book, Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute, it gave me such good like coming of age, that heartachy love, like that first love, that big love, it was so good. It's about this guy and this girl in high school, and they're in the UK, and they have to go to Scotland to go on like this wilderness adventure thing, and it's to earn a scholarship. And so these two people were friends, and they kind of had like this big falling out because he has OCD and she has like a compulsive disorder. And so it's about like the two of them kind of grew apart because he wanted to be like normal and popular, and she was okay with being weird and different. And so they kind of like butted heads over this, but then they have to go through this like wilderness training thing together. And so they sort of like make amends about it as they go through this process. But there was something so relatable to these characters about like wanting to be the better version of themselves, but embracing their imperfections and learning that it's okay to ask for help, but it's okay to be who you are. And it's okay if people aren't going to get that. So like there was just, I mean, as a 42-year-old adult, this book resonated with me so much. Like I can't tell you how beautiful it was and what a great experience it was reading this book. And I really just cherished it. And Talia Hibbert is a fucking poet with words. The way she writes is beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. So I loved it so much. Like it probably will end up being one of my favorite books this year, I think, because so much of it, especially because I've been diagnosed with an impulse disorder. So a lot of that like resonated with me. And also, I finished that one and loved it. And then I started, it's called 1 Week to Claim It All by Adriana Herrera. And I love her. She writes really great historicals. But this one I have not read before. It's a Harlequin Desire. So, you know, those like really skinny ones, like, you know, I know you love those. This one is right up your alley. They would say like, I think someone would tag this as second chance romance, but I wouldn't, just because that would turn you off, like thinking about it. But they got together and they hooked up, and then he cut things off with her and she doesn't understand why, but he has his reasons and they're like really good. So, but basically, she's like the bastard daughter of like this media mogul empire. And when he dies, instead of leaving the business to his 3 legitimate kids, he leaves it to her instead.
Oh,
and
shit.
so she goes to the board and she decides to like take it over. This is like in chapter 1 or 2. It's like right away she goes in and she's like, okay, I'm going to run this thing, because she actually went to school for it. And when his kids didn't. So she gets in there, and it turns out like the interim CEO is the guy that broke up with her. And so the board tells her, though, you have 1 week to give us a 5-year plan. And depending on what that is whether we're going to give you this seat or not. Mm-hmm. So, but you got to work with this guy, the interim CEO, to get all the information you need to make that 5-year plan. So she's like, you know, forced proximity with this guy she thinks like blew her off for no reason when she was in love with him. But he has a really good reason for doing it. So it's like, oh, it's just this like, it's this great, like Harlequin, dirty, like pining, sexy. Oh, it's so good. Like the want is so good. The tease is good. So, oh, it's perfect. Like I'm listening to the audio and I'm like, Mel would love this book while I'm listening to it. So, but it's totally safe.
Let me know it is safe?
Yeah, it's safe. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. When you send your email now, I'm going to look it up.
Okay. All right. I'll send it to you. Yeah. I think I've got like an hour left, but there's like everybody's marked it. I think it's on a safe shelf on Goodreads, and it's like no other women drama or anything. It's like little spoiler if you want to fast forward and not know anything, but he did it to like basically protect her, because the mother was going to like use it against her and all this stuff. So anyways, like that's kind of why he broke things off with her, not because there was anybody else. So yeah, really good. So, but if you go on to Audible and you look up this book, 1 Week to Claim It All by Adriana Herrera, you can get 2 books for 1 credit, because it comes with, it's another Harlequin Desire that is by Adriana Herrera. And the other one is Just for the Holidays. And so it's like a Christmassy book that comes with it. And so I got both books for 1 credit, and I was like, this is incredible. So I'm going to listen to that one next. Right. I think the one I'm listening to is like 4 hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours. At all. No. It's like, that's what I'm saying. It's like those little skinny Harlequin books. It's like the perfect size for an audio on it. So I think total for both books is 11 hours on like 1 speed, on like the lowest speed. So you can fly through that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend both of these, just based on her other writing and what I've read so far on this one. I love her. But okay, I think that was all my updates for now, but we'll get into Jasmine before I keep talking about books I'm going to read next. Okay, so Jasmine Silvera, she sent me all kinds of stuff, so I'm going to go through and read. I'll read her author bio first. Jasmine Silvera spent her impressionable years sneaking kissing books between graphic novels and fantasy movies. She's been mixing them up in her writing ever since. A former yoga teacher, an occasional cellist, she is the author of the fantasy romance series Grace Bloods. Her latest release is Conjuring Moonlight, the second Tooth and Spell book. She is currently working on the final in the trilogy, Charming Dawn. Which I love that she gives you all that she's working on in her bio, because that's like, what's her newest release? Yeah, it's right there. So her giveaway this week is Conjuring Moonlight and Binding Shadows. It's the first 2 books in the series. It's before Tasting Freedom, which you're about to listen to. So if you're listening to this book and you love it, make sure you enter the giveaway and you can get signed copies of those. She has a Facebook group called The Academy, which is Death's Dancer. If you want to know more about her books or hear what else she's got coming, or if you want additional information on her books. So if you read them and you love them and you want more, you can go get in her Facebook group, and she has all kinds of stuff in there. The first book in the Grace Blood series is Death's Dancer, is on sale for 99 cents right now. So make sure you grab that. And I'll read the book bio for Tasting Freedom, which is the book you're about to listen to. Pregnant and alone, Violet Kumasi returns to the hidden city where she was born to find that everything has stayed the same, except her. Now she must face the shifter she once loved and betrayed on mission to gain critical intel as a spy to her homeland. When did she do it? Did she do it to protect her cover or her heart? When the witch he'd never hoped to see again falls into his arms, literally, Ilya Maximovich is forced to rethink everything he understood about the betrayal that drove them apart. She cost him everything, so why does he feel grateful? Adrift in the place Violet once called home, the man she gave up may be the only one who can provide the anchor she so desperately needs. Can they mend the past to build a future together? Tasting Freedom is a second chance shifter witch romance set in the world of the Tooth and Spell books. It takes place after Conjuring Moonlight. So yeah, I know this is super exciting. I love it. Like, it's got all these great elements on it that I'm excited to listen to. And she was just so nice. So I'm ready to dive into her books. Let's do it.
All right, let's send them in. We'll see you guys on the other side.
Bye.
Tasting Freedom. Written by Jasmine Silvera. Narrated by Arissa Evans. After 2 flights, an interminable bus ride, and 6 days on the back of a camel, Violet Kumasi stood outside the ruins of an oasis city under the unforgiving Sahara sun, opened the skin of her arm with a borrowed knife, and let a few drops of blood drip onto the sand. She bound her cut as she called out the invocation. I am a daughter of my mother's house. I've come home. She closed her lips on the plea. I have nowhere else to go, nowhere left to run. She would not beg, not for her own life at least. The slight fluttering in the cradle of her hips had changed everything. She splayed her hand over the new curve of her belly, rubbing absently. A little further, Mango. The first stirrings had come nearly a month ago. The same horrible night Dimitrov had come to her with the threat. Either she would use her ability to create illusions and compel others to help him imprison magical creatures, or find herself in a cage. It didn't matter how he'd found out she was a witch. For 12 years, she'd sacrificed everything, including the man she'd loved, to keep her cover in a world hostile to unsanctioned magic. In the end, she'd failed. When a surprise alliance with another witch had given her a chance to escape, she'd taken it. If anyone could stop the Prague mob boss, it was the steely-eyed metal witch Evie and her werewolf lover Marcus. Violet prayed the 7 would protect them and set her sights on home. Her heart beat with only one song. It had taken all her magic and most of her cash to get out of the necromancer Azrael's territory undetected. An enterprising thief had made off with her luggage when she reached Dakar, leaving only the clothes on her back and dwindling funds in her wallet. She wasted no energy on despair. Violet may have failed her duty, but she would see her child to the one place where a witch's child might grow up safe. Nothing else mattered. Violet glanced behind her at the small band of nomads who had seen her this far and lifted her bandaged arm in a gesture meant to reassure them. The desert tribes carried magic in their bones, as she did. After the necromancer that claimed the continent as her territory had dissolved the old borders, they recovered the old trade routes through the great sand ocean. Most of them had never seen the old gates active in their lifetimes. Bringing her this far was a chance for a tale to tell their children for generations to come. She waited. After an hour in the sun, her vision wavered. Several times, her escort tried to herd her back into the temporary shade they'd erected beside the ruins of an oasis city. She refused. I must meet my fate on my own feet. It felt like a worthy penance. Now the shallow cut ached, the baby stirred deep in her womb. She sipped from the half-empty water skin, all she'd allowed them to give her besides the knife and the robe she wore. The wind picked up, and she lifted the scarf to shield her face from the sand. The air shimmered, revealing the gateway. Violet closed her eyes. Please be alive. Hate me if you must, just be alive. Then the gates opened, and her mind stuttered because it couldn't be possible for her thoughts to summon him. She wasn't that powerful. Or perhaps she'd failed him after all, and this was his ghost come to taunt her. Flanking the conjure-trained witches were 4 shifters. One stood head and shoulders above the others, a mountain in a sandstorm. Ilya? She croaked before consciousness slid away from her. She never hit the ground. Patrolling the northern border, far from the heart and comfort of the hidden city, was an assignment most shifters avoided, particularly if your second skin came with an undercoat. After weeks of Commander Mahari's genial pestering, for Ilya Maximovich, the arid north would be a reprieve. He volunteered. The day before they set out, Mahari found him in the storeroom, packing the patrol supplies. Not hiding. He held back a sigh at her toothy grin and victorious swagger and planted his feet. Only prey ran, and no one escaped the lioness. When you return, she announced, we will go over a short list of witches eligible for Concord. We still have time before the fall ceremony to train for your bond. It is honored to be considered for that post. He managed to make it sound less practiced, but he would need to come up with another line soon. But I am unworthy. Don't you dare lift that paw. He bit down on a laugh and lowered his right arm. It ended just above the wrist, a reminder of his years as a captive outside Moscow, fighting whatever man or animal was thrown into the pit. Losing it had gotten him a rare trip to the infirmary and a chance to escape. So much for playing on her sympathy. Azrael warned us it took 6 of his to bring you down, and that was your bear on a rampage. You've been trained, Mahari said, as if that changed everything, and handed down another bag. Gitya prefers jackfruit. Witches and fruit, he muttered, thinking of another witch and fresh mango slices. They need complex carbohydrates, replaces what the magic takes from them faster. Mahari went on as if talking to a cadet. You need to keep that in mind when you concord in Ezreal's territory. Everybody thinks being revealed, death sentence. He changed the subject. Better to laugh about the past than face an unearned future. I decided I'd rather die fighting. He'd tried, but the broken heart had made him sloppy. Instead, they subdued and knocked him out. He woke in a shipping crate, breathing in warm, humid air scented with plants and animals he had only seen in zoos and private collections. I'll never forget the sight of 1,000 pounds of bear in a shit mood destroying a shipping crate in my training arena, she chuckled, before charging 3 of the highest-ranking people in the group. Figured it best to establish myself as more trouble than I was worth, and be put out of his misery. A little bronze witch of no more than 16, Gitya, he'd learned later, cast a barrier that kept him contained while other shifters marveled at his size. He owed it to his father's kin, great eastern bears. At 19, he'd been the largest in his family for generations. Instead, that bear spent a week in the sun, refusing to relinquish its hold so we could have a simple conversation, she laughed. You have always been a stubborn one. I am not surprised, but it is time. Your probation ended nearly a year ago. When he accepted the terms of his sanctuary, Gitya applied the binding, To protect the hidden city and its residents, the seal kept him in the territory, would immobilize him if he harmed another, and remained until he earned full citizenship. Otherwise, he was free to move about openly in either form. When he did, he'd been reluctantly awed by such a wondrous place, advanced by magic beyond anything he could have dreamed. A place where magical beings from around the world had found refuge after the expected death sentence in their home territories delivered them here. No one hid their skins, horns, scales, or abilities here. Many had lost more than a limb. One missing hand barely warranted a second glance. In time, he came to a painful truth. His betrayal had been his salvation. His basic needs were met, but he was encouraged to find an occupation. Neither farmer nor craftsman, he had been away from his mountain village too long. When he was 19, the man who knew his father's secret from his time as an army conscript hunted the family down. Only Ilya survived to wish he hadn't. From fighting pits to mob enforcer, at 30, he no longer remembered a life he didn't have to fight for. He'd returned to Mahari and asked to train with her cohort of shifters. "You have made peace with your second nature," Mahari said in the supply room 2 years later. "It is a beautiful sight to see your bear now, fighting for something instead of against everything." "I can do city patrol." He learned to live for what he fought to protect, but he wouldn't allow himself to get close to another witch. "And keep training cadets." "And you will continue once you're bonded," Mahari agreed. "My best take the Concord. It is your time." "I will think about it," he said, humbled. "Fine. Just fine." She bared her teeth and slapped his shoulder. Belatedly, he realized she'd won the battle, if not the war. He'd allowed her to slide his feet in the sand more toward the line he refused to cross. "You will have nothing to do but scrape sand from your crevices and think," she called as she strode away, then muttered, "I should have sent him on patrol months ago." Witches alone might cover distances faster by air, but patrols moved overland. One of the other shifters, a Sur-American jaguar, spent most of the first few days chatting about his intended Concord, a young witch from a prominent family. If he hadn't been so genuinely eager, Ilya might have thought Mahari put him up to it. "An apartment in the family compound, perhaps one day we even earn a seat at the council circle." The jaguar touted the benefits before gesturing down the trail behind them. "It doesn't have to be like those two." Farther back on the trail, Gitya and her fox shifter were holding hands and laughing about some private joke. He'd tried not to envy the love at the heart of their concord blooming over the years. Such matches between witches and shifters were uncommon here, but not impossible. "My witch is like a little cousin I had back home, too smart for their own good, easy to want to protect them, you know?" The jaguar added. "The commander and Kiva each have their own families. Sure, they bicker constantly, but they die for each other. The concord is what we make of it. That's what the oath promises." "An oath is just words," Ilya said. "This is a binding." One that allowed the witch to draw on the shifter for power and granted the shifter magically enhanced strength. Bonded pairs were the city's most vital defense, but first and foremost, they protected each other. "I'll think about it." Ilya dropped back to walk alone. "Grumpy old bear," Gitya chirped as she passed him on the trail. After a week in the arid region, he was beginning to long for Mahari waxing on over a cold beer at the riverside bar after training. Patrol was monotonously uneventful, and his bear was miserable without his morning swim. Then something triggered the gate outside the Fachi ruins. These days, anyone returning to the city came from the major ports, air or sea, and directly from the safe houses that acted as embassies. The old gates were relics from before the necromancers controlled the world. "It's probably just desert folk," the jaguar reassured him as they waited for the gate to reveal itself. "Their routes pass this way. Once in a while, a young chief gets a mind to give the warriors a show. "Bear," Gitya called. "Just in case." Ilya obeyed, letting his tunic fall away as the bear came over him. It was in a cranky mood, showing teeth as the veil shimmered and the gate fell away. "Guess we're giving them the show," the fox grinned, clapping spear to shield. It was a small band of nomads, but they stood back from the single figure standing close to the gate. Heat waves disrupted his ability to gauge more than the outline of loose-fitting robes. The dry wind brought a familiar scent. Recognition twisted his gut. He took a step, ignoring Gitya's command to hold his position. Impossible. The figure swayed in the heat. When she said his name, he knew she wasn't a figment of his imagination. He broke into a gallop, then her knees buckled. The bear slid, breaking her fall with his forepaw and engulfing her in fur. Small, perfect fingers slid through the dense fur at his jaw. "Your sisters were brown, like your father," Violet murmured, proving this was real. She was real. "Your mother's kin were from the Caucasus." She was like ripe wheat in Oldham. His bear retreated as he finished the memory he'd given her years ago in bed together on a stolen afternoon. "You have her coat." She smiled as she fought to remain conscious. "Rest." He scooped her up quickly. "You're home." Her eyes rolled. He strode back to the gate with the unconscious witch, ignoring the questions. Her scent had changed. The nomad's robes made it difficult to tell for sure. He inhaled again, the bear's senses picking up the subtle shifts hormones made. She was pregnant. "Call for emergency transport." When Violet woke in the cool healing room, relief flooded her. She was back in the city that raised her. She'd had the most vivid hallucination. A great golden bear had charged toward her at the old gate, but she hadn't been afraid. A deep inhale drew her attention. No dream, then. Ilya slumped in the too small chair in the corner of the room, dressed in patrol gear and fast asleep. A dense, sandy beard threaded with gray covered his chest. She marveled at the wild tangle of sun-bleached strawberry curls on his head. In Prague, he'd kept it cropped so short she hadn't even been sure of the color. Gradually, she was aware of another presence. At the foot of the bed, a kind-eyed older witch waited, vaguely familiar in the way that meant a distant relative. The subtle dance of his fingers flexing created a bubble of silence around them that excluded the shifter. He checked her vitals quickly before addressing the mountain in the room. "He'd refused to leave, but I can send for his commander if he's not welcome." Guilt was a razor blade across her heart. "That's not necessary." "It is good you are awake," the witch murmured. "I suggest you take this time while you can. I have kept them at bay as long as possible." He didn't need to say who they were. As one of the elite spies trained to be the eyes and ears of the council in the outside world, a spider's odds of returning to the land of her birth were low. Violet knew they would want answers for why she'd abandoned her post. "Thank you," she said. He withdrew. The small noises of the healing room returned, accompanied from outside by birdsong, distant laughter of children in the courtyard, and voices singing. It was the song of her heart, but her own kept missing the beat. "Violet?" His voice was the same, husky and perfect. She'd chosen the name because it evoked the colors of home. Hearing him speak it made it hers. He eased upright, passing his hand over his face. The years had hardened his beautiful, angular face. Too big nose, deep-set green eyes flecked with brown, prominent cheekbones. Violet's body ached for him, even as her stomach clenched with nerves. "Ilyushka." The affectionate nickname slipped free before she could stop herself. A light flared in his eyes. But her stomach heaved. He was faster than she remembered. The bowl was mostly under her chin in time. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth in horror. The sickness still comes and goes. His eyes went to the fingers she curled protectively over her bump and back to her face. And then the attending healer closed in, behind the nurse with a damp cloth for her face and a glass of water. That wasn't all. Crowding into the room after a nod of cadre elders was her family. She swallowed the second wave of nausea and girded her heart. She had to tell her story thoroughly, including details she'd learned in her last few weeks that might be helpful. She must urge them to reconsider the complete isolation of spiders. There were powerful witches outside the territory, like Evie in Prague, that could be allies. She could not do that with the deep forest of his eyes full of older questions on her. Conversation started around her, one she knew she should be following. All she registered was the warrior in charge of shifters calling his name and how obediently he rose. A burst of pride stung her eyes. The commander spoke his name with respect and concern. Reflexively, she glanced at his forearm for the scar that signified his concord. Still bare. The ceremony required clasping arms. Perhaps they'd made an exception for him and scarred his left. But he had already turned and she couldn't see it. All she had was the sight of his broad shoulders as he strode away from her. When her attention returned, the high priestess waited. Violet lowered her gaze in deference. "Welcome home." A cool hand curved beneath her chin, lifting her head. "You have served well. Your family awaits." "A debrief," Violet murmured, surprised. "In time." The high priestess stood aside as her family bustled forward. Violet had been 20 when she left for her assignment in Europe, an arrogant young woman convinced she could handle anything the outside world dealt her. She'd chosen her cover, unafraid to use her body for her mission, and unaware that losing her heart would hurt the most. Her mother was more beautiful than she remembered. Grayer, too. Her little sisters all grown up. She had nieces and nephews. Violet was crying before she had finished hugging them all. And still, it was all she could do not to look at the door where he'd vanished. When Ilya returned to the healing room, Violet had been released to her family compound. Over the next 2 weeks, he caught only echoes of her. Her laugh seemed to come straight from his memory, ringing like bells. When he looked for the source of that sound, it was color he registered next. The bright, busy patterns common in her family compound made it hard to isolate her at first among the gaggle of her sisters. The worst was when she wore anything that hugged the new curves of her body, a matching wrap around her hair. That was enough to set him on fire for the rest of the day. His entire body was light and hot, coiled with want. He woke most mornings, tasting her memory on his lips, his hand on his erection, the ache in his hips. He'd managed to live these 2 years, never knowing what had become of her, and this was worse. Here, she was just out of reach. In Prague, Dimitrov had assigned him to her as a driver, a compliment, a sign of her value to Dimitrov as one of the crown jewels in his flagship gentlemen's club. She did not appreciate Ilya's presence, but never took it out on him. Instead, Violet moved through Dimitrov's world, keeping something of herself at a distance, even when she was the center of attention. He'd disconnected from himself enough times to recognize the signs in another. He watched for the moments when she thought no one was looking and her mask fell. Beneath it lay a woman as tired and lost as he had been after weeks of walking through the snowy woods to a city where he would not be recognized. Only this was her wilderness, and she was surrounded by wolves. He began leaving small boxes of pastries in the back of the car before he picked her up. They were the sweet things a girl from his village would have liked. When he learned she had a taste for fruit, it was baskets of berries, sliced peaches, and melon. "I see you," he wanted to tell her. "You are not alone." What need did she have for him here, in her home, safe and surrounded by family who adored her? He barely remembered his. only the distant recollection of reaching into icy water that numbed his fingers as he helped his father check the traps, his mother's hand in his own as she taught him and his sisters to dance. He sometimes dreamed of them, waking to sensations as phantom as his lost limb. So he returned to his group of cadets and his duty, but he could not let go of the sight of Violet clutching her swollen belly. Perhaps that was the reason she avoided him. He had no reason to turn up uninvited to the inner rings of the city occupied by the oldest families to see her, and no right to ask. One afternoon, when he'd released his cadets for the day, Mahari summoned him to the shaded porch where she oversaw training. He arrived with a towel under his nose, pushing the broken bone back into place. He waved off the waiting healer. Shifters healed fast. No point in wasting good magic on his stupidity. By tomorrow, most of the swelling and discoloration would be faded. It was his damn fault for not anticipating the strike. "If you do not take a Concord, I need you to train the ones who will," Mahari said. "Not this shit today," he muttered before catching himself. When he looked up, Mahari's silver brows approached her hairline. He stood at attention. "Apologies, Commander. I have an assignment for you." She tapped the scheduling tablet on her desk, then leaned back in her chair. "Tomorrow, you will escort a witch from Kumasi compound to an appointment in the inner rings." "Violet, it had to be." "The appointment will be lost before you arrive." She glared. For all the previous longing, the thought sent ice down his spine. "My cadets, you will have the entire afternoon." She cut him off. "So, sort your shit out with this spider, then get your head back in my arena. How I have allies." At his silence, she continued. "If you don't want to be interrupted, ask better questions." Why, she sucked her teeth, disappointed. "For us, the crime is revealing each other to the outside world." She had reasons. A truth he understood only after his arrival. Her cover at the club had given her access to those with connections to government and industry in the necromancer Azrael's territory. The information, passed through a network of contacts back to the hidden city, helped keep them aware of the world outside and prepared for any threats. "And still, we punish ourselves before anyone else can," Mahari said, then sighed. "Take some advice from an old lion. Her mother may be no great power, but she is highly regarded. An old story says their family taught the necromancer illusion generations ago. In any case, she chose her husbands well, and 5 cadre-trained daughters is nothing to sniff at. Do not be late." She had her reasons, and now he had his. He caught the healer's eye. "Maybe I will need your charm after all." At dawn, he headed to the river for his bear to swim. When he returned from the barber, a new formal tunic had been pressed and laid out beside his polished gear. According to the Jaguar's note, several cadets were late to training and needed a penalty. Ceremonial dress it was. It wasn't until he stepped onto the patio to calm himself with the view that he realized he wasn't alone. He swept to one knee, lowering his head. The necromancer dressed as plainly and efficiently as any of the senior cadre warriors. Only the metallic sheen of her eyes gave away that she was not a witch, but something older and far more deadly. "I am told this season finds you without a concord." He knew she spoke all human languages fluently, but hearing his mother's was still disconcerting. "I'm honored. My status warrants your regard." "I was not warned about your smooth tongue." Heat rose in his cheeks. "I am not suitable for—" "I am also told you are stubborn." She pondered the nails she kept filed to points in the long silence. Would exile from the territory provide suitable motivation? "Ma'am?" His stomach curled. He searched his brain for more words as the bear roared into his consciousness. Her shadow shifted, sensing it rise in him. She held up a hand. "There he is," she mused. When I heard we had acquired a 3-legged berserker bear, I had little hope you'd be brought around. You've impressed me." He leashed his temper. If they sent him away now, he'd lose even the glimpses of Violet. "I owe the city my life. I'm grateful for the chance I've been given." "I am told you avoid witches," the necromancer continued, unmoved. "Is there old enmity that must be cleared?" "No, ma'am. You understand, a love match is not required," she said. "A concord is an alliance of equals, united to protect and defend our sanctuary." He repeated Mahari's words to every cadet. "Good. Then I expect you will make a suitable alliance, as is your duty." He'd appealed to the cadre on Violet's behalf, trying to warn them of the danger she was in. They told him she accepted her duty. The sanctuary he now enjoyed was the home she'd given up a life in to protect. He vowed to do the same as best he could, but this was asking too much. He struggled to control his restless bear and lost the ability to protest. He bowed again instead. "I am honored by your attention to this matter." "The hell you are." She did not smile. "But your obedience is noted, Shifter." As she stepped through the front door into the busy thoroughfare, her appearance changed to that of a wrinkled old crone. She bore a startling resemblance to his neighbor. In her wake, his bear shuddered, uneasy. Ilya sat and focused on breathing as the healer he saw weekly for the first year had taught him until his mind was calm again. The bear retreated. He understood why Violet had given him up to Azrael. It had been his own damn fault. He broke their unspoken agreement not to seek each other outside the windows of time they stole and went to Violet's apartment on his off night. He failed to keep what had grown between them away from his heart and told her he loved her. He begged her to leave with him and make a new start somewhere together. It must have been the last that did it. Perhaps she could have forgiven the first two as weakness. She needed a day or two to prepare, she promised, and then took him to bed for what would be the last time. In hindsight, he should have known something was off when she requested a detour on the usual route to the club a few days later. When the necromancer's zombies had pulled them over in a remote area of the city and he'd been dragged from the car, she had not cried out once. He knew then she'd given up his secret. Knowing how much she had sacrificed, running away with him had never been an option. Maybe she'd been afraid he wouldn't give up now that his heart was involved, or that if they got caught, her cover would be at risk. The city was counting on the information she provided about the necromancer Azrael's dealings. And while he lived a life of freedom in her home city, she'd been left alone and unprotected under Dimitrov's thumb. The healer gave the feeling that kept him awake a name. Survivor guilt, and helped him begin to untangle the complex web of emotions it left behind. Now, he dressed to present himself at the Kumasi family compound. This was his chance to make things right. She and her child deserved a life away from the past she'd left behind, even if it was without him. Violet's middle sister discarded all her outfit choices and hounded her into a blouse and skirt in a bright purple and yellow wax print. It was far too flashy for a simple social call, even between members of council families. "My belly is exposed," Violet cried. "Fertility is very sexy," her sister pronounced. Violet tried not to laugh as she hugged the tall girl with too many opinions. "Now, sit down and let me see to the mug at the top of your neck, dear sister." Her sister shoved her at the vanity, sucking her teeth. "To think you used to be such a beautiful girl." "You too will meet age in time," Violet grumbled, but sat patiently as her sister went to work. Illusion ran in the family. "Keep it simple. It's only tea." "But the house has many witches. Perhaps one or two would catch your eye." Mango somersaulted in her womb. "No one wants a clever witch who loyally served her country for 12 years and carries the next generation of the Kumasi," her sister intoned, as if reading a ceremonial decree before grinning. "You have been in that cold, dark north too long. Fatherhood is a bond, not a genetic consideration. Still, Ilya's face in the healing room haunted her. She'd seen so many of his emotions: sadness, grief, amusement, and, at the end, the agonized fury. She hadn't known what to make of his expression, and then she'd thrown up all over him. To see her, and like this, well, Ilya was a man of the cold, dark north. Once, he'd made her laugh herself breathless, reciting 7 generations on both sides of his family's increasingly complex names and the most absurd titles. Bear clans were exceptionally fond of their size and lineage. To raise another man's child with only one skin, she couldn't imagine it. As for her own, 2 of her sisters had already contributed to the next generation of Kumasi. Though magic wasn't always predictable, it wasn't unlikely her child would have a stronger charm than hers. She was a dead end. The kindest thing would be to let Ilya go. She focused on her subtly highlighted appearance in the mirror. A fine job. Her sister's proud grin reminded Violet that becoming a spider hadn't just been a young woman's excuse to escape the confines of home. She'd kept her family safe. Your escort has arrived, beloved. Their youngest sister appeared in the doorway, and they exchanged a look over Violet's head. What mischief? Violet narrowed her eyes at them. She'd never seen a sorrier impersonation of innocence. They were up to something. Have you been possessed by imps? She picked up her basket on the way to the door, muttering, This escort business is absurd. I've only been away, not suffered amnesia. It is a courtesy, a familiar male voice offered. A veteran spider, retired from service, should never have to walk alone again. Violet halted in the courtyard. She resisted glaring at the doorway she'd come through, where her sisters were surely watching. You. Me, Ilya agreed. 2 years, and seeing him in her family house sharpened the air between them as though she'd been moving through a haze and not noticed until a sudden breeze swept it away. The sudden clarity made Violet's eyes sting and her ribs ache. Ilya standing at attention made a fine sight. He'd transformed again, clean-shaven and hair-trimmed but still long, closer to the man she remembered. He returned her focus, gaze still as a mountain forest. The junction of her thighs pulsed just looking at him. The baby stirred, reminding her she wasn't a love-struck girl or a horny youth. No matter how her body longed for his touch, that time was gone. She refused to allow her heart a say in the matter. They were on different paths now. The Cadre listened and respected her report. If witches outside the city could be trusted, they would be allies. Her mentors were optimistic that she'd take to healing, excited by the prospect that her compulsion might prove a sort of anesthetic to help ease the suffering of the injured. She was glad to have a purpose again. He should be free to live the life he'd made for himself. He owed her nothing. Are you ready, Spider? She couldn't read his expression, and nerves thrummed in her belly. Best to get this over with. Fine. Violet was no longer the most fascinating novelty in the neighborhood. Though a few curious eyes followed her, they kept a respectful distance. Ilya's glower probably didn't help. But when she looked back at him, he smiled, greeting a familiar face in passing. It had taken months for her to coax a smile from him in Prague. Even then, they were flashes of amusement, quickly hidden. She came to enjoy the challenge. Something the matter? He spoke the language of the city very well. Just taking everything in. He chuckled. While she was still coming to grips with him laughing on a public street, he steered her out of the path of a particularly ambitious messenger. She barely heard the youth's apology. Ilya's touch sparked the memory of every moment since the first time he'd helped her out of the car. She was so close her shoulder brushed his chest. He smelled better than she remembered. The redolent air and persistent sun had baked him into something new. Foot traffic flowed around them. If she turned her head, she could lose herself in the forest of his eyes again, the hidden places he'd shown her. Her rumbling stomach saved her. She removed her elbow from the cradle of his fingers and kept her eyes carefully ahead of them. "Have you eaten?" His breath eddied along her temple to her ear. "Training ran long, and I didn't have time to think, never mind eat before." Realization rocketed through her, and she forgot to avoid his gaze. Returning had been more complicated than she'd anticipated in unexpected ways. She'd changed. It was hard to be the girl her parents remembered and her sisters followed adoringly, but he saw her. Recognition sparked and flared, heated waves of longing becoming a possibility. "There is no appointment, is there?" "There is no appointment." When he nodded, the new strawberry waves scattered across his brow. She wondered if they were as soft as they looked. She scowled instead. "You don't have the rank to pull off a maneuver like this." "Apparently, Mahari does." "Did she recruit my sisters?" Meddlesome little imps. She'd told her sisters only enough to stop them from pestering her about the shifter standing guard at her bedside. Too much, perhaps. Or not enough. "Likely." He laughed again, bigger this time, and the sound cascaded through her. She stared. His brow wrinkled. "What?" How could he not see the web being constructed around them? "Stop that!" "Stop what?" he said, amused. "Smiling." She stalked into the crowd, continuing under her breath. "It should be illegal with a mouth like that." He caught her in 2 ground-eating strides, moving into her path. She had to stop or crash into him. His little grin said he'd heard every word. "Let me feed you," he said. "Both of you." Violet's jaw flexed on the words. She didn't owe him an explanation. This was goodbye. "You thought I hadn't noticed." His brow arched, but his smile didn't falter. Knowing that entertaining her patrons often involved more than dancing and conversation was one thing. Seeing her with this obvious reminder should be another thing entirely. "I know you noticed," she said, wary. "I'm sorry I threw up on you." "I've had worse greetings." His thumb brushed the bone of her wrist absently, and the calluses against her pulse made her breath catch. Her mind betrayed her, serving up memory after memory of that touch, the taste of sweat on his skin, his hard breaths in her ear. She'd been warned the second trimester often came with a return of her libido, but this was overwhelming. They settled into the traffic flow to the city's largest open-air marketplace. He had a favorite food stall, 3 actually, and filled her basket with wrapped samosas and a container full of lentils, saffron rice and dried fish, and leaf-wrapped kebabs among local delicacies. Someone had tried, and failed, to teach him to haggle. He paid too much for everything and seemed quite proud of his prowess. In return, the merchants threw in a little extra. Out of pity, she suspected. At the ice stall, a set of twins capered around him while their mother flavored frozen crystals in wax cones. The man Violet had known in Prague would never have hurt a child, but he would not have traded a knock-knock joke with one either. She watched, nibbling at the extravagantly rainbow-colored mango-flavored concoction until her teeth hurt, while their mother looked on with exasperated pleasure. They ate by the river as the boat traffic slid by. Violet spread an insect-repellent dome around them, an easy trick every witch knew, but took her 2 tries to get right. "How's training?" he teased as he stripped the meat from a skewer in one deft pull of his teeth. "Retraining," she grumbled. "I've never been the witch either of my fathers are, but at my age, being bested by 14-year-olds at the most common tasks is humiliating." "Doesn't pregnancy affect a witch's charm?" At her silence, he looked over, offering a dish. "You should finish the lentils. I hear protein is good for the sickness, and you still don't eat meat." Again, the relief at being known swept her resistance aside. She took the little cup. "There's a reason most witches are fully trained before reproductive age," she admitted. "And this little mango's wreaking havoc on mine." This new smile of his gained another dimension. You always did have a taste for fruit. You were always leaving fruits in the car, she argued. The first time she'd slid into the back seat after a flight delay to find a small box of pastries, he'd dismissed her gratitude. When she'd eaten all the berries and left the tart behind, he'd switched to fruit. It became routine. The mangoes were my favorite, she laughed. She caught her breath and dared the question. Why? You are so small, he said, startlingly solemn. Surrounded by so many vicious men, you needed your strength and a reminder of life's sweetness. She forced a joke over emotion that tightened her throat. You and my sisters, always trying to pad me up. His gaze swept her body, leaving her flushed and a little shaky. You've never looked better. Now was when she should let him go. She reached for him instead. Her fingers settled on his arm above the missing joint. He shivered, and his fingers slid over hers. Ilya, I don't expect forgiveness for what I did. I have a very good prosthetic I should learn to use. He interrupted, staring at their hands and then at her with a hint of hesitation. Does it bother you? Nothing about you has ever bothered me. She had seen his second nature the first moment she'd looked at him. His control had been so fragile, but neither he nor the great shaggy beast had ever given her any reason to fear him. On their final night in Prague, he had risked a shallow grave to confess his love to the lost girl he thought she was and offer an escape, a chance at a new life. The only thing I wonder was why, he said without accusation. Why send me away? Violet's breath caught. Did he really have no idea? Someone saw you leaving in the morning. I heard rumors you were sleeping with one of us. There had been 3 other dancers in her building. It would have only been a matter of time before the noose closed. Alexei was jealous because Dimitrov trusted you. He would have given you up. She watched the understanding dawn on his face. The memory of the hours she'd agonized over the decision swamped her, and her voice shook. Exposing you to Azrael before Dimitrov could find you was a gamble. Because you knew it wouldn't be a death sentence, Ilya finished. It can be if the magic is used to harm others, she said. But I'd hoped. You weren't protecting your cover, he murmured. Once you were gone, keeping my cover was the only thing I had left. Violet's brows pinched in confusion. But before, it was the only way I knew to protect you. That night, he'd told her he'd loved her. She'd said nothing. For 2 years, he'd been in her home, training among those for whom duty was everything. He assumed she put her cover before him. She shifted a little, trying to get more comfortable in her changing body and keep hold of him. He noticed. How could he not, with her belly sticking out to... His voice cracked as he watched her. And who protected you? He was asking, in the only way he could, about the baby. She dragged her knees as close as she could and rested her cheek on her shoulder. A witch controlled her fertility. The truth always was more complicated, but this hadn't been forced on her. Sometimes that life felt like a dream, she tried to explain. You woke me up. Being with you was being myself again, and then you were gone, and it was like a nightmare. I thought I'd never see home again. I wished for something of my own to keep. I must have... Well, a witch should be careful with her words. His palm spanned the small of her back, fingertips kneading the muscles along her spine. She wanted to surrender. Instead, she told him about the cages and the threat. When I asked my patron for help, he denied the baby was his and told me I belonged to Dimitrov. Coward, he ground out. He stared at the water, jaw flexing. Fool. She couldn't stand it. She gave him as much time as her heart could bear, then she cupped the firm, smooth skin over bone and muscle and tugged his face to her. The thought of you, here, safe, even if you hated me, kept me going. I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking you touched me, and I never stopped hoping it wasn't a dream. He kept eye contact as he angled his cheek into her fingers. There is nothing to forgive. I could never hate you, Violet. She shivered at the contrast of prickly stubble and full lips sliding over the base of her thumb into her palm. With the brief flick of his tongue against the sensitive center came a sound out of one of her most pleasant fantasies. The hum vibrated and sent ribbons of warmth through her heart and between her legs. His lashes rose at the sound of her gasp. All the playfulness was gone from the shadowed forest of his gaze. Something more intense rose in its place, restless, needy. Response uncoiled in her abdomen, making her thighs feel heavy and liquid. Will you spend the afternoon with me? His voice caressed. They took the river path, leaving the marketplace amid the fishermen shouting wares and the taxi boats coming and going. The heat seemed to slow everything to the pour of golden syrup through thick air. Music had started on one of the cafe patios where many took refuge this time of day. That was life here. She hadn't known how much she'd missed it. You used to stop for street musicians, he leaned to murmur. It didn't matter what instrument. You closed your eyes and smiled like your heart had been broken. You never hurried me on, even if it made us late. She slid her arm around his, and he flexed his elbow to catch her, as though this kind of casual touch wasn't new. His apartment was in her favorite section of town, the first part of the city settled by witches. The magic was old here, quiet. Climbing, flowering vines covered the walls, and mature shade trees cooled off the winding paths. What are you smiling about? He unlocked his door and held it for her. She stepped into the cool space. Remembering when you asked me to dance? 2 airy rooms and a tidy kitchen. The light reflected off the river poured in from the expansive windows. I figured seeing me trip over my feet would amuse you. He sobered too quickly. She liked the new, smiling, laughing Ilya. Anything was better than watching you try not to cry. Your mother was a good teacher. Violet ached for the family he'd never see again. He let her go to open the windows and the big door for the river breeze. She would have never forgiven me for getting so rusty. I thought the only way to escape the barracks was by Concord, she joked, watching the river slide by. They kicked me out. He returned with a cool glass of water. Apparently I snore. You don't snore, she scoffed. The few times they'd had more than a stolen hour or two, he slept like the dead, his entire body wrapped around her. I'm the one who snores. They contemplated the shared knowledge in silence. Sex had been easy between them, a way to regain some control of their lives, with the understanding that it could be only that. Until it was more. You breathe very deeply, he teased, especially when you've come a few times. Involuntarily, her eyes jerked up. His were waiting. I knew I would have to make hard choices, she said, grief for how much time they'd lost dissolved into the rightness of this moment. I didn't count on loving you. We should have run away. It doesn't matter. His fingertips curled under her jaw, a request. She tilted her face up into the waiting forest of his gaze, clear and bright as dawn. I never stopped loving you. Afia, Violet, Kumasi. Her body sang with the sound of her names, who she had been, who she was. No mob, no patrons. They were free. His fingers brushed the curve of her neck, and she knew she would not give him up again. Not now, not ever. Is it too late to begin again? Isn't that what we've been doing? When his lips slid over hers, she moaned into his familiar taste. He cupped her ass, dragged her against him, and stroked her tongue with his own. I approve of your bedding, he murmured against her lips. My compliments to your sisters. She laughed into his mouth, and he drank it down. his forearm around her shoulders, holding her close. The baby fluttered. He withdrew, alarmed. "Haven't you ever felt a baby kick?" she teased, too kiss-drunk to be shy. He looked doubtful, but let her take his hand. She seated the heel against her bump, just inside her hip bone. Mango obliged, and his eyes widened as he pressed back, searching for more. "Is this okay?" "It's perfect." She turned her chin up so her forehead pressed under his jaw. He used to shiver when she kissed him there. It was her turn to ask. "It doesn't bother you?" He cradled the curve of her belly and returned her reply. "Nothing about you has ever bothered me." He scooped his forearm beneath her, flexing, and she gasped a little when her feet left the ground. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her lips against that patch of skin like a benediction. "Bedroom." The rumble of his laughter swept through her as he carried her away from the window. She expected a more rushed reunion, tearing clothes and bruising skin. Instead, they lay side by side on his bed for a long time, peeling away cloth and reservations like a long-awaited gift, exploring the tracks time apart had left on once familiar bodies until she ached for him. He hadn't forgotten how to touch her, with teasing fingers, firm arm, and that too clever tongue, until she happily begged for mercy. "Is this safe?" he asked. "For Mango." Her eyes stung as her heart warmed, but she teased. "It's safer for you if you do not stop." He laughed, dragging her hips to his as he slid inside her from behind, gripping her thigh in his enormous hand. After a few shallow thrusts, he bottomed out easily with a ragged moan. Gripping her to him with his forearm, he cupped her breast and rolled the nipple in his fingertips. His teeth grazed her shoulder. She went tight and liquid with release almost at once. She closed her eyes and let everything narrow to sensation and sound, gasps, soft cries, and his final stuttering thrusts. In the lethargy after, she snuggled her bum against him and prepared herself for the bare hug of arms and legs. Sleeping this way made much more sense in the cold, dark north. They were going to wake up in a sweaty tangle. She couldn't wait. "A child belongs to the woman who bears them." He curled his hand around her bump. When she was sure her voice wouldn't tremble, she finished the old saying. "And the family that raises them." He was so quiet for so long that she almost drifted off. "I would be part of that family, if you would have me." "I would." She couldn't catch the sob before it broke, but he caught her. In the long, golden light of the afternoon, he held her as she wept, and she was finally home. Just before dawn, Ilya left Violet snoring contentedly on his pillow. The bear, sated beneath his skin, rose when his toes touched the riverbank. He dove deep, skin giving way to fur as the water closed over him. He cut the bear's swim short. He wanted to feel the subtle shift of life beneath her skin. "Mango," he smiled, "which isn't fruit." Perhaps he should feel differently about the baby. A more insecure man might, but which children were rare and prized. To be part of their raising was a privilege, and Violet had accepted his offer. That was an honor. On the riverbank, he shook nose to tail and yawned. Violet waited on the patio, wrapped in his sheet. He took his time climbing the slope to enjoy the sight. When he reached her, he wagged his shaggy head again, grinning at her gasp of protest as droplets of water pattered over her skin. The bear retreated, and she stepped into his arms, shivering a little against his damp skin. He traced her curves through linen to convince himself this wasn't a dream. When she raked the damp hair from his face, his scalp tingled pleasantly. "I should get you home," he sighed. "I am an adult and will return when I damn well please." She yelped when he lifted her off her feet and carried her back inside. The sheet sagged under her arms when he put her down inside, exposing one perfect breast. "Unless you want me to leave?" "Never." The thought made his chest tight, and he didn't resist when she shoved him onto the bed and straddled his hips. But training? I am a veteran spider. My training can go to the hippos. She fought with the fabric still between them. You, however, have Mahari's most promising cadets waiting for your tutelage. Will you help or keep talking? He struggled to hold on to his thoughts at the sight of her, all curves and bare skin. Here, things between women and men differed. The marriage contract could be undertaken or dissolved, and often more than two were involved in any long-term arrangement. It made families a complex network of unions, bigger, stronger, better able to protect, defend, and love. Only one thing here promised the kind of commitment he was looking for. He understood his part in the web. We should talk. Later. She kissed him soundly. One more, quick, before you go to the arena. Violet woke in the courtyard garden to her youngest sister wailing her name like a siren. Come, hurry! She roused drowsily, hoping for Ilya. There had been a messenger bearing little presents in the intervening days. Every morning, he arrived early to walk her to the witch's palace for training, like a suitor, her sisters shrieked, but had not carried her off to make love in the afternoon light again. Probably for the best. When he'd returned her to her family courtyard and thanked her sisters with a wink, they'd dissolved into laughter. Violet had sent him away before the whole household could join the festivities. Plus, she was still catching up on sleep after returning from his beautiful apartment by the river. She hadn't meant to nap in the hammock. Freeing herself was an embarrassing exertion. Her middle sister rounded the corner in time for Violet's ungainly dismount and slapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a laugh. If you tell anyone what you have seen, Violet threatened, tugging her hair wrap back into place, I will give you warts. You wouldn't dare. I am the pretty one. Vain as a peahen, Violet cried, laughing. Her sister narrowed her eyes. Your man is at the citadel. Violet was in motion before registering her destination and a plan, slipping back into the old instinct as a spy. Come, help dress me. They'd done nothing wrong. Violet had missed only one day of training. Ilya had been a few hours late and was no longer a cadet. They didn't even know what rank to give him since he'd chosen no concord. She slowed, realizing. Stubborn bear. He told her sometime during their hazy afternoon in his bed that the necromancer commanded him to find a suitable witch. Violet, sensibly, had agreed. It had been their first fight. There would be more of those if they all ended so sweetly. Violet didn't argue with her sister's outfit choice, hurriedly applying the slightest bit of illusion to make her face look less puffy from sleep. Call me a taxi, my sweet. Oh, it's my sweet when her beloved is in danger, her sister sang in her wake. Your taxi is waiting in the courtyard. By the 7, her family could be a nuisance. She loved them dearly, and he was now part of that calculation. The necromancer's citadel rose from the center of the great rings of the council families. It seemed to take forever to reach the innermost doors. As Violet approached the council room, she grew calm. Ilya was here, and they never had to hide again. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The necromancer sat on her stone bench, completing the ring of chairs filled by the city elders, the high priestess, Mahari, and 3 ranking council members. Ilya stood at their center, a mountain in a storm. He looked up first as she entered the room, and the others followed his gaze. Violet resisted the spy's instinct to blend into the background. Those days were over. She went to his side and bowed to her elders. Pardon the interruption. As this concerns you, it is forgiven. The necromancer's metallic eyes shone. Violet straightened. Me? One of the counselors grimaced. Indeed. Our Ilya has finally agreed to offer himself in concord, Mahari crowed. You have? Satisfied green eyes confirmed Violet's suspicion. If he had asked, she would have argued some stronger witches would benefit more from having his bond. She faced him, hands on hips. You have. He returned her expression, smug. She has no idea, one of the council members scoffed. This is not how things are done. Unorthodox, to be sure, another muttered, but it is his offer. I'd hoped for a more powerful witch, the high priestess admitted. Ilya's jaw flexed, but Violet touched his arm, willing him to understand this was all talk. In the end, the law would stand. Choice and consent. His gaze flicked to hers, trusting. You wished only that he must concord, not how or to whom. The necromancer's brow rose. You, of all people, should be more careful with your words. Violet never imagined witnessing the leader of the witches suck her teeth at the necromancer like an irate sibling. She fought the urge to laugh. Ilya focused on the conversation but angled his shoulder between her and the others. Protecting her, she realized. One of the counselors leaped to his feet, voice shrill. My daughter has already agreed. The necromancer stilled, like a hunting cat, as the counselor realized he had said too much and let his words fade. Was the offer made to this witch? Violet wondered if the necromancer also bristled at the thought of deals curried by ones who already held so much power in the city. Now was the time to be heard. Feeling Ilya's eyes on her, Violet lowered her chin. I have offered to no witch but the one before you. He faced her. Will you have me? I will. A possessive jolt made her words more strident than she intended. A witch spoke her will first and foremost. It was the source of her power. She faced her elders. I accept. Ilya's voice lowered for her alone. Good. To their elders, he issued the words of the Concord Bond as though a challenge. Until the seven calls us to the earth from whence we came. The elders looked entirely unimpressed by the drama of their display. Only Mahari grinned toothily and clapped her hands in delight. A healer with a Concord, someone muttered. Nonsense. But Violet no longer heard them. She had eyes only for her shifter, her mountain. Imagine how many more she could help with additional strength to draw on, Mahari cackled. And with a powerful shifter to protect her, she is a battlefield asset. We are not at war, Commander, the council member snapped. Should that time come, the necromancer spoke, such a consideration would be valuable to have made in advance. They are in love. It's not meant to be a marriage. It is what they make of it, Mahari said. The necromancer nodded. The nature of the match is between them. The offer is made willingly. Acceptance is spoken and heard. They will participate in the first ceremony after the child is born. Ilya bowed. Violet lowered her gaze, and her fingers found his. The necromancer's inhuman gaze swept them once more before she departed, flanked by her shadow. The counselors trailed the high priestess from the room. Well done, Mahari slapped Ilya's shoulder before swaggering away. When they were alone, Ilya hooked Violet's waist with his forearm, dragging her close. His palm settled over her belly, and Mango danced against his touch. I am yours, little spider. He lowered his mouth to hers. Both of you. She grinned against his lips. Yes, you great stubborn bear. You are. This has been Tasting Freedom by Jasmine Silvera, narrated by Arissa Evans.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, lady listeners. Thank you so much to Jasmine Silvera. We really appreciate you giving us Tasting Freedom this week and letting us play it on the podcast. If you want more, like I said before, make sure you go check out her Facebook group, The Academy, and also check the show notes. We'll have links to everything down there, especially to enter her giveaway this week for signed copies. And make sure you check out the first book in the Grace Blood series, Death Dancer, while it's on sale. So make sure you grab that. And then up next week, we have Dominique Laura with Sure Thing that I'm excited about because that cover is really pretty.
All right.
Yeah.
Tell them what to do. Oh,
But yeah, I was going to say, do we have anything else for Alexarelli we should talk about?
I mean, we have a
series.
series coming out. I'm gonna go ahead and put the templates and stuff up, so I'll have links. So if it's live, you can click it and it'll be there, or you can add it.
Yeah, make sure you check those out. So awesome. All right, well that's it.
Then tell them what to do.
Fuck your day up. Make stay your bitch. Don't be a dick.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Read me romance. Read me romance. Read me romance. Read